format in accordance with the House Order of November 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Screenshots or photos of your screens are not permitted.
Mindful of the health protocols indeed in the room, but pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, May 30th, 2022, the committee is continuing its study of global food insecurity. And indeed, colleagues, I would just remark that we had a very good first meeting. The information was helpful. I appreciate your questions, and I think the information we got back was very credible, and we had great witnesses. Today is going to be no different. And for the first hour, I'm very pleased to say that we have Mykola Solsky, the Minister of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine. Minister, I know that right now, as I check my watch, it might be 11:30 in Ukraine. So thank you for making the appearance. Thank you for being here today, because your testimony is important. We stand with you, and we heard from one of your parliamentary colleagues, I'll say, Yulia Klemenko, one of the members of Parliament of Ukraine. We look forward to hearing from you, and we know that this is a challenging time. So you are going to have up to 5 minutes. I will allow a little bit more if you'd like, but we want to hear some opening remarks from you, and then we will turn it over to our members of Parliament that are excited to be able to engage and ask you questions accordingly. But thank you, welcome. And the final thing I'll say, we've been very blessed. I've mentioned it a number of times. We have 41 Ukrainian interns who are on the Hill as part of the Canada-Ukraine parliamentary program. A number of them are in the room. They've been invaluable at connecting us to you and your government, and so thank you so much. Over to you, Minister. Minister, you're just on mute. We just need you to unmute, please, sir.
Дуже дякую вам. Dear parliamentarians, today is the 106th day that Ukraine heroically resists Russian attacks. During these days, the war in our country has already caused thousands of civilian victims, brought sorrow to millions of people, the destruction of civilian and other critical infrastructure, including agricultural one. First of all, I would like to thank you and your country for the support you provide in these difficult and dramatic times for my country. Without your political, humanitarian, military, and financial assistance, it would be extremely difficult for us to fight the overwhelming forces of the enemy. Thank you also for your sincere words of support and solidarity, along with the adamant spirit of the Ukrainian people and the courage of the armed forces of Ukraine. Your support is the key to Ukraine's success in defending its independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. The war was stalled Ukrainian export. Due to the blockade of Ukrainian seaports, more than 20 million tons of grain are not on the world market. The blockade of ports has dramatically reduced our export opportunities. In March, we exported 200,000 tons. In April, 1 million tons. In May, 1.7 million tons. In comparison, the export of agricultural products had been up to 5-6 million tons per month before the war began. In the current situation, 2 million tons per month would be the maximum amount that we can achieve. European countries will begin harvesting in a month, and in our opinion, the Romanian port of Constanta will mostly work with European companies, and its capacity will be loaded with their export. It will further complicate the export of Ukrainian products. The blockade of Ukrainian export has already led to a record price increase on the world market and will certainly provoke a global food crisis. I would like to highlight that the only reason why world food prices are rising is an senseless attack by the Russian Federation on Ukraine and it has nothing to do with the sanctions on fertilizers, including potash. It's just the manipulations from the Russian Federation and Republic of Belarus and nothing more. We are also approaching another problem, storage of grain in Ukraine. The total storage capacity until the 24th of February was the 75 million tons of grain. Currently, we have only 60 million tons of storage facilities left as a result of destruction and temporary occupation. Given the current low rate of exports, last year's harvest, and our harvest forecast, the shortage of storage capacity will reach 10-15 million tons by October. That's why we have an urgent need to set up temporary grain storages. The most effective way to solve the export problem is to defeat the Russian army on Ukrainian territory. So we call on to continue helping the Ukrainian army and the supplying weapons needed to protect our territories. We understand that the war can't be stopped in the short term, so we plan to cover the shortage of storages with temporary storage facilities, modular constructions, and plastic bags. It's obvious that the shortage is quite large, so we would be very grateful if the government of Canada should consider the possibility to provide us with such temporary storages, at least in some part, that would significantly help to preserve the crop and help us to supply it to the world markets in the future. Finally, I would like to emphasize again that the only solution for Ukrainian products to be exported and to prevent the deepening of the global food crisis is to defeat the Russian army in Ukrainian territory and to completely unblock Ukrainian ports and organize regular shipping. Other temporary measures, such as humanitarian corridors, will not address the issue, as in the conditions of the war, the cost of ship, freight, and insurance will be too high, while the situation will be remain critically unsecure. Only the end of the war can grant a secure movement in the Black Sea. Therefore, I appeal to you, don't stop the supplies of weapons to Ukraine and increase them. Don't suspend existing sanctions and impose new sanctions on Russia, Belarus, and any of their supporters. Continue to support Ukraine and its position and request as the international arena. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister Solsky. Now, colleagues, just a reminder, and let me commend you, Minister, on your English. I know that's not always easy, especially before a parliamentary committee. So we do have the benefit, colleagues, of having Ukrainian translation, and I'd like to thank our clerk for making that happen. So that is actually the auxiliary channel. The minister will take, he will have the access to hear in Ukrainian your question in English or French. Of course, there will then be a bit of a delay in terms of the translators picking up the Ukrainian translation back, so just be prepared for a little bit of a delay. Minister, make sure that you have your Ukrainian channel accordingly. We're going to start with the Conservatives for the question period. Mr. Barlow, you are up first for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think I speak for all of us that it is an incredible honor, Minister, for you to take the time to be with us, certainly considering the immensely stressful war that you're trying to deal with. And I think it's critically important that Canada stand with Ukraine, as certainly for most of us who represent Western Canada, our agriculture industry was literally built on the backs of Ukrainian immigrants who came here more than 100 years ago and broke the ground and built our agriculture industry. So, thank you. And we're certainly thinking of you. A couple of, just to get to my questions, I guess, first off, we've been speaking a lot about military equipment and how we can help you with that. And I certainly don't suspect or don't foresee that to discontinue. We know how important it is to provide the resources to Ukraine. To help in the military side. But are there some, and you spoke about storage, but are there some things that we can do in Canada to help you on the agriculture side? Seeds, farm equipment, machinery, fuel, what would that storage, that temporary storage, look like? As I know your storage is much different than we have, where we store a lot on farm, and you have more of a hub of storage. Are there some steps or things that we can do to provide some assistance on that side?
Дякую.
Thank you. Indeed, in Ukraine, we do have these permanent grain storage facilities. However, for a while now, Ukrainian farmers have been using these temporary storage facilities, especially in times of high yield harvests. These are plastic bags, and we also have temporary storage experience similar to what is being used in Canada. These are temporary round structures on top of which, under a film, the grain is being affixed, and there are special machinery to load it on top of these structures. Another thing that would be very important for Ukraine, we have a lot of displaced persons. Several million people have moved away from the war-torn areas. What we need are jobs for them, and including in the agrarian sector. One of the areas that we'll be looking at are berry picking, fruit picking, small orchards up to 25 hectares, 60, 70 acres, in other words. So we approached the Canadian government with a request for assistance with tree saplings. We also had meetings with the Minister of Agriculture of Canada. We mentioned this. Our expert goes through railway and roads towards Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, and Romania. We need additional veterinarian and phytosanitary laboratories in order to speed up the expert. So that's the kind of assistance we would also need. Thank you.
You just mentioned there as well about rail and highways. It's my understanding, and I want some clarification from you, Minister, that the rail systems still, in many cases, Soviet-era rail systems are not compatible with the rail systems of some of the countries around you, Poland and Romania, which causes a real problem with your supply chain, especially with the blockade at Odessa. Is there any steps that can be taken to try to address that? Is it simply that you are moving rail cars to the border and then having to move the commodities, grain or barley, onto a different car and keep moving it? Is that the situation?
Відбувається так.
Yes, you're absolutely right. We have our types of our railway cars, and the size of distance between the lines is different between our country and our European neighbors. So when we get to a border, we have two options. Options number one, it's in somehow to reload the cargo into European cars, railway cars, or second option, in some countries, for example, in Romania, there is a special procedure when a Ukrainian cargo is being fixed with the actual wheels that are able to use the Romanian railway system. Of course, it complicates the logistics, complicates the process of transporting goods. We were not ready for such developments that we have now. And because of that, we see the long delays in crossing borders. It takes a few days. At the same time, we see on the part of the European Union, they don't have enough cargo containers, because the European Union also wasn't prepared for this particular war and such developments. And European businesses, they are not ready also to quickly build the necessary number of cargo railway cars, because in previous years they didn't need such a quantity. And they tell us that if in a few months, in 6 months, in 1 year, if you hopefully will open your Black Sea ports, and in that case, we will have many cars, railway cars that we don't for cargo that we won't be able to use to fill. And this leads to a situation where transport in Europe, the number of these cargo cars, they are not increasing in the numbers that we would be able to use to move our grains. We understand that if we used to be able to load Panamax 70,000 tons ship over 1 day period, 24 hours period, but now it will take much longer to use the railways.
Try to keep the time. I gave a little bit extra because, of course, we really want to hear from you. I'll go to Mr. Jouen right now for 6 minutes.
Yep. Thank you so much, Minister.
Дякую, пане міністре Сольський. Я не можу навіть собі уявити, наскільки складна ситуація зараз в сільськогосподарському секторі, а і в цілому в країні, зрозуміло, що переживають люди. В моєму виборчому окрузі понад 12 тисяч людей українського походження. І також зараз в мене є тут присутня українка, яка проходить практику в моєму офісі, зараз тимчасово перебуває, Аліна, і мені дуже приємно з нею працювати. Ви сказали, що я перепрошую, що у нас...
Oh, is it because I'm in English, or?
Okay, I think we're good now. My apologies for
Зараз
interrupting.
вже є.
Good. Okay. Mr. Jouen, feel free to continue.
Okay, thank you. So my understanding is that in normal times you would have 75 million tons of storage capacity, and now you're at 60 million tons. Is that a direct reason because of the Russian bombing?
Так,
Yes, this is a direct result. The main reason that part of Ukraine in east and south is occupied by Russia, and we have a number of storage facilities there. Second reason, elevators in Ukraine, they were not used for a long extended period of time. The grains weren't stored there for a long time. They would be stored there for a short period of time and then moved on to ports. Because now we are exporting 3 times fewer grains than normally. That's why we have our storage facilities filled and there is no turnover. So when we foreseeing that in autumn we'll have a lot of corn and we have a lot of it, and we think if our ports will still be blocked at that time or if it will be partially open. And there will be much fewer ships than before for a number of reasons. So we'll maybe 10 to 15 million tons will need to store this crop in order to be able to export it at a later date. Even though that's taking into account, we already decreased our forecast for crop productions, taking into account the war.
We met with the Food and Agriculture Organization this morning, and we heard you on storage, and they said that they would be able to set up fairly quickly temporary grain storage, but that only lasts 4 months. We asked about the status of seaports, and we know we've seen terrible, shocking images in Canada with regards to the bombing of certain grain terminals at some seaports. Is it your opinion that we know that there's a crop season that's coming in July? Is it of your opinion that if we push back the Russians, that the infrastructure would be in good enough shape to be able to continue exporting those grains through the seaport, or you're still analyzing the infrastructure status?
What we can say, it's only what we know now, today. We cannot really forecast with a certain degree of certainty what will happen, how many new shellings and new missiles will be launched, what next extractions will take place. If, let's say, today the war stopped, in terms of there is no critical damage to the agriculture infrastructure. There is only one big port that has been not destroyed, but seriously hampered. So we think maybe 10% of our ports facilities will need to be repaired at this point. There are some elevators that are partially destroyed, but it's only few percentage. In terms of percentage, it's a small percentage of overall storage facilities. So we have some bridges that have been destroyed. We have some roads that are damaged. But if, let's say, the war will stop tomorrow, I think that we would be pretty quickly renew and reestablish our infrastructure. But at this time, we don't know when this war will end. What we see over the last 2 months, they increase the number of shellings, and they also now targeting more and more agriculture infrastructure and ports, which wasn't the case before. So what we are thinking now, that the Russians are paying more attention now to agricultural infrastructure, and it also coincides with their international rhetoric, and when we talk about global food security.
Much, Minister. I'm out of time, so I'll let my other colleagues jump in here. Thank you so much.
Maintenant, Monsieur Perron pour...
Mr. Perron, 6 minutes, please. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Minister, I'd like to begin by saying that we are with you and that we thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. There is no partisanship here. When we talk about Ukraine, we will do everything we can to help you. Here is my first question. We spoke with Ms. Klimenko during the last meeting about the urgency of unblocking ports, and particularly Odessa, and creating a safety corridor. We know that there have been negotiations. Are there discussions going on? Is there a solution that's achievable? And are there talks going on with NATO on this issue?
The negotiations that are currently taking place, it's between the United Nations and Russia. Also, Turkey is partaking in these discussions, and they're talking about how to open Ukrainian ports, lift the blockade. we've directed our proposals from Ukraine how we see it happening, and we are hoping that this or next week we'll get some feedback as to next steps or next meetings. But this is a process. It takes time, and no one is certain when it will lead to results and when will it will be completed. In my view, the proclamations that the Russians make and their actions two totally different things. We've seen Russian ministers stating that they are not against exporting for Ukraine to export Ukrainian grains, and that they will not be preventing Ukraine from doing this. But at the same time, we see the missile attacks against Ukrainian ports that are used for agriculture shipments, as well as missile attacks and shelling of the bridges that are used for moving agricultural cargo. 90% of cargo is agricultural cargo, and the Russians know that, and yet they're attacking it with missiles and shelling. So we have to be mindful when we hear Russian statements that they will be not preventing Ukraine from exporting agriculture goods and ships from Ukraine. It's just talk, because until the time that Russian ships move away from Ukrainian ports, international shipping lines will not be sending their ships to Ukrainian ports, because of the insurance cost, because of different circumstances. It's a very difficult situation. Prior to war, we were sending 200 ships from Ukrainian ports. In certain circumstances, in current circumstances, it will be maybe 10, 15 ships a month, which is a very small amount. It's like a symbolic process, which will not resolve for food shortages for the world and for Ukraine exports. So my opinion is that Russians, they are making loud statements, but at the same time their actions go against those statements. And we cannot really trust the Russian statements. So the world business organizations, governments, they will not put much trust in Russian statements, and they will only monitor and pay attention to actual actions on the ground.
Thank you. What about access to fertilizer within the country? We know that some of the land has been sown. What kind of crop are you expecting in comparison with previous years? 20% of the farmland is in occupied areas. Is there going to be a different yield, a lesser crop because of the fertilizer issue?
Last year, the total harvest in Ukraine was 115 million tons, approximately. This year, and we're expecting, if the weather cooperates in addition to the war, about 60 million tons of harvest, and about 35 plus will need to be exported. So even if we are decreasing the harvest, the export volumes are still quite large. The fertilizers, some farmholds had stocks of fertilizers. The war started on the 24th of February, just before the planting season or the sowing season started in Ukraine. And so they had a certain stock of nitrate fertilizers and others. So those have been used by the farmers. For next year, it's difficult to forecast because the fertilizer prices are quite high. But we think that the fertilizer will arrive into Ukraine from other markets through Western Europe.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Parent. Mr. McGregor, 6 minutes, please.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Minister, I'd like to echo the comments from my colleagues around the table to thank you for your time today and to also express, along with them, our solidarity for you, your people, and your country. I had a chance to speak with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization this morning, and one of the questions I asked was about the territory, the Ukrainian territory that Russia now occupies. We have heard reports that they have stolen Ukrainian grain for their own profit. And I guess my question to you is, what can countries like Canada and the rest of the international community do to make sure that we are keeping tabs on that stolen grain, holding Russia to account for it, but also any countries that might be knowingly buying that stolen Ukrainian grain? Can you maybe talk a little bit about that and any information you might have?
Thank you, distinguished colleague. The grain that is being taken out of Ukraine is wheat. We have in these regions large storages of wheat. We see that about 500,000 to 600,000 tons has already been taken out of the country by the Russians. They've loaded it in the Crimean port of Sevastopol. So every ship leaving Sevastopol loaded with grain is loaded with Ukrainian grain because they have no other wheat there. Since this grain is difficult to sell, as we do react to this, and we were able to turn these ships away from Egypt, where they were initially heading. So they were diverted and went to Syria. We have no allies in Syria. And that's where those ships arrived. Here's what we are observing lately. They are now taking this grain to Russia. They mix it with the Russian grain, claim that the origin of this grain is Russia, that it's been harvested in Russia. And since there is no ban on Russian grain, realistically, I understand how difficult in this situation it would be to put an export ban on Russian grain, given the prices and given the needs in North Africa and Asia. We try to track this stolen grain, but it takes a separate investigation for each case. You can never be quite sure whether the grain is just Russian grain or if it's a mix of Ukrainian and Russian grain, and the documents have been falsified. We have been collecting evidence, and we have been talking to the G7 agriculture ministers, and we spoke with them 4 weeks ago in Stuttgart. We will be asking to enact sanctions against ship owners who are transporting such grain, if we have evidence about that, and sanctions against those who are buying and selling this grain, in order to discourage this practice from happening in the future and making it more complicated for Russia.
Minister, the second question I had just in the last minute and a half that I have was with regards to Ukrainian farmers who now find themselves in occupied territory with Russian soldiers around and in control. What has your government learned about the plight of those Ukrainian farmers, And if you could just maybe talk about anything that you have learned about the Ukrainian farmers who now find themselves under Russian occupation, what is happening to their farms, how they are doing, and so on.
They are in obviously very difficult conditions. The area where they live are under occupation. The main issues that Ukrainian farmers encounter on the occupied territories are the following. The occupation government or the occupation forces ask them to live according to the Russian laws and to register as Russian enterprises. Whoever objects to this can see their grain confiscated. In addition, Russia will take away their business if they see that the farmers are not complying. The Kherson and Zaporizhzhia areas that are under occupation, we see that Ukrainian farmers are not complying with the Russian demands, and they are trying to survive. They spend more time in the fields. They try to prevent Russians from finding them. They are evacuating their family members. They're making it complicated for the occupation forces to find them and to communicate with them. The occupation forces, despite its complete cruelty, are also trying to use this as a publicity stunt. They're trying to use this to calm the local population, get them to register as a Russian business, and then show on TV that everything is peaceful and the farmers are happy. But we see that this is not working. Even Russians watching Russian televisions do not believe that this is the case. So farmers are just taking it day to day, and every day they're making new pretexts to run away or avoid the occupation forces.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. McGregor. Mr. Liu, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Minister, for being here this afternoon. I will repeat what my colleagues have said. We are with you all the way. We know that stored grains, the wheat, which is the most important grain, has a restricted life. If you can't find the means to build a temporary storage facilities, what is going to happen, since there is a maximum period during which the wheat can be stored?
No.
Well, sometimes the situation is critical. If we do keep this grain, even in temporary storage facilities, we understand that depending on the type of grain, we would only have a year or two at the most. And we hope to use this time in order to improve the work of the ports, obtain some improvement on transportation towards Europe, but we will need several months in order to achieve this. If we do not have enough storage facilities, obviously this will be a problem for maize in particular. Maize can be kept for a long time, but if we still may have a problem next year if we do not manage to preserve the harvest of this year, and a lot of it will be left rotting in the fields.
Thank you, Minister. Another question. You said earlier that at present Russia is targeting agricultural facilities, agricultural infrastructure, port infrastructure, roads and railways used to transport grain. If this continues, there will be significant damage that will be more difficult to rebuild quickly. What impact is that going to have on the world supply of grain? Could this lead to a famine? How do you see things in Ukraine?
Distinguished committee member, when we were speaking with an FAO representative a month ago, here's what we said. If we're talking about wheat, in Ukraine we're talking about 3 harvests simultaneously because we're unable to export the harvest of last year, that's year 1. We don't know how to do the harvest this year and how to export it. In addition to that, the winter wheat, half of it is on occupied territories, so that's the second one. And the third harvest in August is where we put in winter wheat for the following year. So here's what we see. The farmers will have to decrease the amount of winter wheat they sow, or they will plant more rapeseed as there is more market for this. There is fewer tons per hectare, and it's easier to transport. So it would not be surprising that if we see no improvement with the ports, the wheat in Arabic countries will cost $600-700 per ton, and this would lead to large problems. This is a very high price for wheat. These countries have no budget for wheat. Egypt, other countries are still removed from the war. They're hoping that in 2-3 months the situation will change. Maybe there will be some sort of agreement that they can survive on the existing stocks. But unfortunately, that will not happen. Their hopes, I'm afraid, will be dashed. I think that in July and August, we will see emotions in Arabic, Asian, and African countries reaching their peak because the offer of grain, of wheat, will be very low, and USDA will have to correct their.
Thank you, Mr. Lew, Minister. Ms. Taylor-Roy, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister Sulski, for being here with us. I know you're terribly busy, and I appreciate you taking the time at this late hour. So what I'd actually like to do, although I have several specific questions, is to ask you, because you're here so that we can better...
I'm sorry. Can I ask for translator?
Okay, I'm just going to stop the clock, Ms. Taylor-Roy. We'll make sure that we have that sorted away. I'll look to the clerk. Just one second.
Чути. Мене прохання, якщо можна, давайте уважніше, щоб ми перекладали, не затримували парламентарів.
Please continue.
Now, Cody?
It is, yes. We're back, Ms. Taylor-Roy, so over to you.
Thank you. And like all my colleagues here have said, we are standing in complete solidarity with you. And I think what I'd like to do is give you the opportunity, because we are here to listen to you so that we know better how to support Ukraine in the agricultural sector and your farm workers as well, both on our own and in concert with your other allies. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to say to us, perhaps, things you think are important for us to hear in terms of how we can help and what are the most pressing issues that we can help with.
Дякую. Насправді,
Thank you. Well, maybe it's not very specific, but the most efficient resolution of situation in agriculture sector of Ukraine is to bring this war to completion, to an end. We see that Russia doesn't want to do that. And we are forced and we are ready to fight to finish this war. So, in order for Ukrainian farmers to continue their work so that the ships can come into ports and to stabilize food prices, we need stability, we need to be able to know the future. And it's not possible to have this forecasting without bringing the war to an end. That's why I'm not talking about tractors. I'm appealing to you to do everything possible to help us bring this war to an end. In regards to the agricultural sector, it is a matter, of course, of storage facilities. We see how critical it is, and it will be. And we know that Canada is one of the leaders in agricultural sector and in agricultural technologies. And part of the actually agricultural sector in Ukraine is very similar to agricultural sectors in the USA and Canada. We have similar agricultural cultures that we grow in our, so in that sense we are close, and the size of farms, the technologies that are being used are similar, and Ukrainian farmers have experience using these technologies. So in terms of storage of grains, this is something that we need, especially now that we cannot export the grains. So after the armaments, that would be the next most important thing.
Seconds, maybe a little over a minute. So maybe a very quick question and then a quick response from the minister, just so we can try to stay on time. Thank you.
Thank you. And so thank you for that. And we understand that the most important thing is ending the war and securing the future of Ukraine for Ukraine and for all of us. I quickly, though, you mentioned displaced persons as well and the need to try and help them to find employment. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, of course. What we see in our agricultural sector in Ukraine, if we look at the number of people employed in the agriculture and compare with the area of agricultural land, we have very few people, not enough people working in agriculture, mainly because we are growing corn, rapeseed, oil, sunflower. After the disintegration of the former Soviet Union, there was sort of approach to grow what was the easiest cultures to grow. So there are certain areas in agriculture that are underdeveloped currently. And I think this is what we can focus on, and we can employ many more people. It's been developing, but in a very slow pace. So we would like to see it intensified, and because many people, I think, would like to be involved in that. And there are a lot of agricultural lands to be involved in this type of agricultural productions. And it's one of the fastest and least expensive way to create new work jobs if we compare it to other types of agricultural productions. But of course, we also need new agricultural technologies. Canada is a leader in some areas in terms of fruits and orchards, how to grow them, expand them. We have agricultural lands which are similar to ones in Canada, so we can probably, hopefully, use your experience. And we are actually already purchasing a number of intake materials from Canada. And so we are thinking that we will be forwarding to the Canadian government our ideas and propositions, what kind of help from Canada we could receive in order for us to employ more people in Ukraine in the agricultural sector. This way we are hoping to decrease the number of displaced people who are traveling abroad from Ukraine.
Leroy. Now we are going to move to the Bloc Québécois and the NDP portion. These are shorter portions, 2.5 minutes. So I would really request Mr. Perron and Mr. McGregor a relatively short question, and I'll try to hold it to 2.5. We've been a bit flexible, but please, over to you.
Monsieur le Ministre.
Minister, I'll come back to export capacity. You said that your 60 million tons that out of those 60 you will be able to export 35 million, but you do fear there will be a grain shortage in the countries that usually receive grain from you. I'd like you to clarify that. Now, within Ukraine, depending on sectors, in the occupied sectors, do you fear a shortage in the food supply, or given that you're an exporter, do you not have many fears on that score?
If we talk about basic food supplies, they're fine. They have enough of grains stored from last year harvest, which was stored there when this territory was still ours, not under occupation. And so it was sown last year, so they will be able to harvest it this year. Also, they have some basic supplies. They have enough. Obviously, that Russians will also try to introduce some commerce, some trade. So, because they are occupying power, and they will be trying to win favors from local population. So it's an obvious kind of truth. And that it's difficult for them to do that. It's not going easy for them, because they were hoping that they will be well received by the local populations. But what they're faced with, that everyone is very much against the occupation. So we can forecast that it will be a difficult situation, but we do not foresee like hunger or famine. We do not foresee any of that. There will be some food shortages of certain fruits, for example, or some vegetables, but it will not be critical. And if we are talking in a limited sort of time frame.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Perron, Mr. McGregor.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Minister, very quickly, we know Ukraine is a breadbasket for the region, for many countries in Africa, many countries in Asia. I guess what I wanted to know from you is, you said that emotions will run high soon because of the food prices and the lack of exports coming from Ukraine. Do you have a sense of the damage that is being done to Russia's reputation in that region? Because many of those countries, Russia has spent decades trying to build a relationship with them. Is there an understanding now, among those countries of the damage that Russia is causing to their future stability and security, especially when they're looking at rising food prices and shortages?
I can only tell you my personal opinion. It's obvious that every country now, every person in the world, even if they live very far from our region, they pay for this war because they have to pay more for the food products. And I think that lately, that African countries and our countries in other regions of the world, they begin to understand that even in Egypt, their tourism, which is historically so they've always had kind of a careful relations with Russia because of the tourism implications. But even that will not now prevent them from seeing that they are paying too high of a price, that they are not speaking out against the war situations. What we see in last few weeks, that the Russia begins to understand this also, and that's why we can see that there was a leader from African Union visiting Russia recently, holding talks, and there were statements by Putin that we are not against exports of grains from Ukraine. We are not preventing anything. We are not. So this is, I think he's laying groundwork for future statements where they will be saying that they are not responsible for the crisis, but it's Ukrainians together with their Western partners which are not able to either organize the export or they don't want to organize export of grains. So I think this is what they're doing. They're laying groundwork, foundation for future accusations against Ukraine. Because officially he was making a statement that we're not preventing any exports. Please go ahead and export. But how can it be done if you have submarines, if you have naval ships there where there is fighting every day?
Apologize, I don't mean to cut you short, but I know that we want to get to one final round of questions, so it would normally be 5 minutes. We don't have that time. Mr. Epp, I'm going to ask you to ask one tight question, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Lewis for one tight question, and then unfortunately we're at our time. So, but Mr. Epp, please go ahead.
Thank you, Minister, for joining us in such difficult times. I've shared with this group before, this is personal for me as my 4 grandparents were born in southern Ukraine. Canada and Ukraine are bread baskets, but my own heritage and where I visited 3 times has been in the southern part, Zaporozhye, Kherson, Melitopol, those regions. It's a vegetable and fruit area, and you've touched on that. Can you tell us about the impact of this in the vegetable production for your own people, for Ukraine? And I know some was also exported and also manufactured. I know the Chumak company of your ketchup. And so can you tell us more about the situation regarding fruits and vegetables?
Yes, I can see that you know this particular area of Ukraine, and yes, its agricultural production is very widespread there. This area is under occupation now, and because of that, we feel the lack of early vegetables and fruits. We can see that farmers in that region of Ukraine this season, next season, they don't want to deal with vegetable and fruits because this requires bigger investments as opposed to investment of soy or corn. So temporarily, I think they will not be concentrating on the fruits and vegetables. And secondly, these areas, they require irrigation, watering. And they have special water channels from Dnieper River. And from what we understand, partially part of these channels, waterways, are used by Russians for defense, as defense lines, defense structures. So it is very difficult, and hampers, of course, of agricultural work. So occupation, not enough water, and constant war.
Mr. Epp, for the question. We're going to go to Mr. Lewis again. Just one question, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister Solsky. Really, really appreciate your time and your dedication. We've discussed here and elsewhere that the war is having a devastating effect on everyone, including farmers. We've heard that farmers are short of diesel. Some are scared to plow their fields for fear that they are mined. And those that are not fighting on the front lines are facing their own challenges on the farms. And just to sum up some of the things we've heard, the lack of supplies, the price of existing supplies that are there, lack of workforce, reduced number of livestock and crops planted, and also storage capacity issues. And we did hear from the Deputy Director General of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization that in Ukraine, small farmers produce an overwhelming amount of the food. It's the small producers in your country. Here in Canada, we represent farmers in our ridings, and as we meet with you, you're representing the voices of farmers for all of Ukraine. So I thought it might be fitting to end, if you could paint a picture for all of us, expand on the challenges for the average small farm in Ukraine, and in the face of those challenges, their determination to keep feeding Ukrainians and indeed keep feeding the world. In other words, I wanted to give you an opportunity to share with us your pride in Ukrainian farmers. Thank you.
We indeed are very proud of our Ukrainian farmers. They haven't given up. They're working hard every day. 75% of the lands have been planted and they're being labored. And we see that they're sometimes working just a few hundred meters from where the bombings are. The small farmers are under 100 hectares. According to European standards, these are large farmers, but according to Ukrainian standards, these are small farmers. We have received a promise of assistance from the European Union. There will be a compensation per hectare because they are working in more difficult conditions than others. They have less access to loans from banks, etc. These farmers will receive assistance in September and August from the European Union.
Much, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Minister. That concludes our first panel. But Minister, let me say from the bottom of my heart, and indeed from all the colleagues, as you've already heard, and indeed others who aren't here, we stand with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us to provide that important testimony. Our commitment to you is that this study will provide recommendations to our government on how best we can help. I heard during your testimony that you will indeed be engaging at that with our Honourable Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau. We look forward to supporting her and supporting the government on how best we can help you and your people. And as you mentioned, we're very proud of your heroic and brave farmers. So we'll leave it at that. We'll let you enjoy your night, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, distinguished chair. Thank you, committee members, and thank you to the entire Canadian people.
We have officials from Global Affairs Canada who are already on the line. So normally I say like 2 or 3 minutes. I'm saying like 30 seconds. So just please stay where you are. If you really want to grab a quick coffee, go ahead now. But we're going to suspend for about 90 seconds and we'll be right back. very quickly, but for our second hour of the panel, we have from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, we have Peter McDougall, who serves as the Assistant Deputy Minister on Global Issues and Development. Mr. McDougall, welcome. Thank you for being here, and our sincere apologies for the delay. That is the nature of procedure in the House of Commons sometimes, but thank you for your ability to stay. And we also have Tara Denham, who is the Director General of the Ukraine Strategic Action Team. We have up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, and then we're going to proceed with questions. We obviously heard from Minister Solsky just today. Powerful testimony. We know that you guys will be watching this entire issue closely, and I'm going to turn it over to you for opening remarks, and then we'll get to questions. So, Mr. McDougall.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Can everyone hear me all right?
We can.
Okay. Donc, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your study on food insecurity. I'm sorry, I was on the wrong audio channel. The study you are undertaking is coming at a critical point. After decades of constantly declining, food hunger has been on the rise again since 2015, particularly as a result of climate change, conflicts because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and economic slowdown. In fact, before the invasion of Ukraine, food insecurity had already reached very high levels. It is estimated that 800 million people experience hunger. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has enormously exacerbated the situation. It is going to be the greatest shock to food insecurity since 2008 and 2009. More and more people in the world are at risk of hunger. The Ukrainian minister has talked about the significance of grain. Russia represents a large proportion of fertilizer. Many countries depend on fertilizer from Russia. This, combined with the rise in fuel prices, has led to significant issues. In March 2022, fertilizer prices had gone up by 220%, which is the highest increase in 2 years since 2000. The African Development Bank has pointed out that food production in the continent could go down by 20% because African farmers will have to pay 300% more for imported fertilizer.
Together, Russia and Ukraine represent about 15% of global cereal exports. Countries face immediate risk due to the disruptions that occurred after the invasion. Many of these countries are already acutely food insecure, like Yemen, Mauritania, Madagascar, and many others. However, beyond the disruption of supplies, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has had a major impact on food prices. Food price inflation is now the major concern as world food prices have reached historic highs, exceeding all previous food crises stretching back to the 1970s. In March, global food prices hit the highest level on record. They were 30% higher than they were in January and over 60% higher than they were prior to the start of the pandemic. The World Bank estimates that each percentage point increase in food prices means we have 10 million more people in extreme poverty worldwide. Food insecurity and malnutrition are reaching untenable levels in regions and countries such as the Sahel, Yemen, Sudan, and Haiti. Rising food prices could also trigger a new wave of political instability, and the minister noted this. Recent unrest and demonstrations in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Tunisia, Sudan, Iraq, and Peru are linked in part to the worsening food crisis. Russia bears particular responsibility for the global food security crisis. It has attacked one of the breadbaskets of the world, destroying Ukraine's capacity to supply the world with key agricultural commodities such as wheat, sunflower oil, sunflower seeds, and barley. Before the war, Ukraine exported 95% of its grain via the Black Sea. Russia is blockading Ukraine's ports from being able to export grains and other goods, and is also shelling the rail lines that are being used to reach alternate ports in Romania and elsewhere. Russia is also restricting access to its own agricultural commodities and fertilizers. The Russian invasion has underscored the need to ensure that Canada and other donors not only provide short-term humanitarian assistance to respond to this crisis, but that we also need to enhance our efforts to make food systems more resilient in the face of climate change, conflict, and other shocks. In 2021, Canada's support to sustainable agricultural and food systems reached its highest level in decades. This increase was driven by large-scale investments in agriculture and food systems through our climate finance program, working with organizations such as the FAO and the International Fund for Agricultural Development. The current crisis has put food security at the top of international discussions. We are coordinating within the G7 and other multilateral fora to ensure a coherent and coordinated response with other partners. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Expected to speak here as well. Thank you very much, Mr. McDougall. Now, I don't have any other speakers. I think, Ms. Denham, you're here to answer questions, so I think I will proceed right to questions. Thank you. I see you nodding. We're going to start with the Conservative Party. Mr. Falk, over to you. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials for stretching your day out for us and providing us with this useful testimony. Earlier in the week, we heard from Member of Parliament Julia of Ukraine, Yulia Klemenko, that she believed there was a plan to create this food shortage and crisis, and that plan would see massive migration from Northern African countries and Asian countries and Arab countries into the European area in an attempt to politically destabilize that area by overwhelming their social system. You seem to suggest that that is maybe something that you would agree with Mr. McDougall. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think what I would agree with is that one of the potential consequences of the blockading of the conflict, the blockading of the Ukrainian ports, and Russia's own actions in limiting its exports of fertilizer and its grains, can have destabilizing effects in all parts of the world, particularly, as the minister mentioned, in a number of African and Arab states where there's a high level of dependence on both Russian and Ukrainian grain.
Okay. This question may be better answered by Ms. Denham, but as we talk a lot about Ukraine being the breadbasket, and we recognize that they're a major grain producer, but they also have a vibrant livestock, slaughtering, processing, value-added industry. Do you have any comment on how that industry is faring during this difficult time?
I don't know if Tara will be able to answer that, but okay. I will let her take a shot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're welcome to answer it as well, Mr. McDougall, whoever's best suited.
I cannot answer it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. Again, I'm not able to answer it in detail. What I can say is in our bilateral development assistance, we do provide support to some of the dairy processing facilities and some of the smaller farmers, but I can't speak in detail to that particular question.
Okay. What are some practical things that you as a department have thought we can do to alleviate some of the strain caused in Ukraine by this food crisis?
Well, let me take that from a couple of perspectives. First, just in terms of our response globally. We have dispersed more than $500 million in humanitarian assistance. The vast majority of that food assistance to countries around the world, many of which you mentioned. We also have invested several $100 million and more to come later in the year in food systems around the world, and then specifically in Ukraine. We have, since the start of the conflict, we have contributed $245 million to support our humanitarian response to Ukraine. The vast majority of the funds has flowed to Ukraine. Nearly $100 million of it is direct food assistance and cash support, and then other aspects of it will support Ukrainian refugees in neighboring countries. And Tara, you may wish to add.
Sure, if I may, to add a bit more to Peter's answer. So we have a long history of a bilateral development program with Ukraine. And so we already have the connections and funding that were going to local organizations. So one of the first actions that we took was to actually provide as much flexibility into the programming that we could so that any of the organizations working within Ukraine could adapt and change their project activities and be flexible and to respond to the needs. In terms of some of the concrete activities that have happened, so I did mention quickly in my last answer, but there have been 6 dairy cooperatives that are actually supported, and they're helping to procure the forage and collect and process milk. That's being funded by Canada. We've also supported the distribution of potato seeds to over 2,600 farmers in Western Ukraine to help them actually seed and actually support their access to the smaller plots of land. We're actually also supporting a cooperative on dairy processing. So that is another one that is being significantly funded by Canada.
Can I interrupt you for just a moment?
Sure.
I just want to get this on the record, and I think I'm fast running out of time. In my parents, like Member of Parliament Epp, my grandparents all came from southern Ukraine as well. And we have an organization there called Mennonite Center in a town called Moloshanks. And I had a report this last week in church from the executive director who was in attendance here in Canada. And she said that it was inconsistent with the report we just got from Minister Salsky, that the Russian people are actually working with food distribution organizations to a degree to allow compassionate response to individuals that are in the occupied area. Is that your understanding as well?
So that's my understanding. There's a lot of organizations, and the Ukrainians are supporting and working with a number of the entities that are in Ukraine. So there's a lot of course, Ukrainians that have stayed in Ukraine to support. So the areas that I was speaking to where we're providing the Government of Canada funding, but you're absolutely correct that there would be many other national entities and civil society organizations. It's a very vibrant community in Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Thank you, Ms. Denham. Right on time at 6 minutes. I'd like to also recognize that Miss Leanne Rood is replacing Mr. Barlow. So welcome back to the committee. In the 43rd, you were here, and you're certainly no stranger to agriculture. So welcome. We're going to go to Mr. Turnbull for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to our panelists today. What a great meeting. So I wanted to start with just a question. I know, Mr. McNougal, you started off by, in your opening remarks, listing some of the countries that were impacted. This morning we had the opportunity to hear from Beth McDowell, Deputy Director General at the FAO, and she listed some information about hotspot zones that were the most food insecure. I'm wondering if you could fill us in on the countries that you think are the most impacted by Russia's illegal war on Ukraine in terms of food supply.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. So there are sort of layers of vulnerability that various countries have, but certainly in terms of the ones that are at acute risk, either because of a shortage of food or a shortage of fertilizers and increasing prices in both cases are countries like Egypt, Yemen, Lebanon, Mali, South Sudan, Ethiopia. Those are, there are others, of course, but those are sort of the ones that we are most concerned about, because in many cases they already have already had existing challenges and underlying conflicts or other climate change issues, which when you add the Russia-Ukraine consequences, put them in quite dire conditions.
Thank you for that. And in terms of the coherent and coordinated response that I think you referred to, are there sort of multilateral discussions going on to have a collaborated or collaborative approach to helping feed those countries or supply those countries? And I guess I would ask, just based on Canada being such an agricultural superpower in many respects, producing so much itself, is there a chance for Canada to step up production and help to serve some of these countries that are in need?
So I think thank you for the question. I mean, I think in terms of Canadian production, I would propose to get back to or to have Agriculture Canada officials speak to that. The way in which what we do though with our international assistance funding is assist countries to improve their own production, whether through the provision of funding for climate smart agriculture, food systems, food system governance. There are a lot of ways in which both working directly with countries and through some of the organizations that you mentioned, like the FAO and the International Fund for Agricultural Development, that we support countries and farmers, and particularly smallholder farmers, to increase their production.
Thank you. I know we also heard from Paul Hagerman, the Director of Public Policy with the Canadian Food Grains Bank, and he had said that Canada is the third largest contributor to the International Food Assistance Convention, behind the United States and the EU. He also, when he came before the committee, I think suggested that we may increase our assistance in proportion to the global food price inflation. Is there any talk about that, about sort of indexing our contributions to the rate at which inflation is affecting these countries?
I mean, it's an excellent question. The way in which we provide humanitarian assistance is we begin the year with a certain amount of money, which is just over $600 million. And we allocate much of that early in the year, and then as new crises emerge or new needs emerge, we have a number of mechanisms that we can access to increase the funding. I would say we wouldn't probably. I don't know that we would directly respond to inflation as opposed to directly respond to an appeal for greater need. So whether as we've done in the case of Ukraine, as new appeals come out, we've increased the amount of money we've made available.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of referring back to your point, which was that I think you said for every percentage point that the price of food goes up, that it's about 10 million people that would be food insecure. That's right. So it just seemed to me that Canada might consider its, sort of assistance in proportion to the price inflation of food around the world. It might be an interesting way to. Anyway, thank you for that, Chair. I have 1 minute. Okay. What else is Global Affairs working on that will impact Ukrainian people? Because I've asked you about the effects around the world of global food insecurity caused by the war. We also understand that there's people in Ukraine that are food insecure. I think we heard from the FAO this morning that they're now listed as one of the most food insecure countries in the world on their hotspot map. So what more can we do from your perspective? I know you've already listed what we've done, but what more are we planning to do?
Sorry, just to clarify, in Ukraine?
Yes, in Ukraine for people that are living there, despite the fact that they're being bombed and shelled every day.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So I would just say that, in terms of the amount of money we have contributed to Ukraine, we are one of the leading donors in response on the humanitarian front. So we continue, as I said, to do about close to $100 million in direct food assistance, and then another 140 plus million to support other aspects of the humanitarian response. The amount of money that Canada or other countries have available will never match the need, and that's equally the case in Ukraine as it is in every crisis in the world. So Ukraine does stand out as being the best funded UN appeal, I think, ever in terms of humanitarian response. So Canada's played a leading role in that. and we will, as new appeals emerge from the UN system, we will assess very carefully and propose a response to the government.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall. Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Maintenant, Monsieur Perron, 6 minutes.
Mr. Perron, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the witnesses for being here with us this evening in spite of the fact that the meeting had to be extended. I'd like to begin by the issues touched on by the Minister, the importance of a safety corridor to enable export of Ukrainian grain. I think that would certainly be in everybody's interests in the short term. What can Canada do to provide assistance in creating a corridor of that kind? And could we engage in negotiations until things are cleared?
Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Chairman.
The two aspects of how to move Ukrainian grain. The first, as the minister mentioned, would be some kind of agreement to restore access to the Black Sea. And I would just say that on that, the UN is leading a process to try and negotiate an agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And then the other set of alternative routes, which is largely led by the European Union, involves the movement of grain through rail and road to ports in the Baltic Sea, to Poland, to Romania. That is, as the minister mentioned, a suboptimal solution. You can never move the volumes that you could move through the Black Sea. And so the European Union is really the lead on that. It has set up a matchmaking mechanism that will allow Canadian companies to become engaged in that process. And then in terms of how Canada can respond directly, we have received requests from the government of Ukraine. The minister mentioned a couple of them today to deal with their export challenges. They've asked for support towards additional grain storage, as you heard, as well as lab equipment to help establish labs in reclaimed territories, which will assist in providing Ukraine exports. So we're working very closely, ourselves and our colleagues at Agriculture Canada, to determine the specifics of those requests, and working with other countries to ensure that there's no duplication or overlap. And so we're continuing to work on that and hope to come to resolution very soon.
Merci. Comme vous abordez la question.
Thank you. Since you're talking about storage, that was my next question. How far can we provide assistance quickly in providing access to the kind of temporary structure requested by the minister?
I'll start, and perhaps Tara will jump in as well. Donc, merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question.
We are. I will say this: that the minister characterized it very well. That there is a time aspect to this. That if Ukraine does not have sufficient additional storage in place by, I think no later than September or October, there'll be a risk of grain spoilage. And so, I know that many members of the G7 and the European Union are also looking at increasing the support and provision of storage, and there are many partners, one of which you mentioned or was mentioned earlier today, the FAO, that could help with that. But I'll perhaps ask Tara if she has anything to add.
Sure. Just to add, and thank you for that question. As Peter mentioned, we have received this specific request for grain storage. And so we've been working very closely with Agriculture Canada, CFIA, and others to go through the specifics. We're very cognizant of the time frame. So we're pursuing to find a number of options and exploring organizations that we've worked with before that have procured this type of equipment so we can move fast if we're able to do so. So that's what we're working through the system now.
Dernière question.
A last question. We've heard that the world grain shortage would be part of a Russian strategy to impose medium and long-term pressures so that concessions would be made on territory. What would you know about that? And how much information do we have on the stolen grain that the minister mentioned and the parallel trade that the Russians are trying to engage in to sell that stolen grain? Are we able to come back and can there be reprisals on people who've done this? Is it at all foreseeable that African countries in dire need of grain would refuse to buy it?
Thank you for that question. So in the first instance, I think it is fair to say, based on what we've seen of Russian actions in blockading the ports, the Ukrainian ports, and in putting restrictions on its own agricultural products, that it is trying to use food as a tool of war. With respect to the stolen grain, yes, we have seen probably the same evidence that you've seen and that the minister refers to, that there has been grain stolen and showed up in Syria and other places. You know, and depending on the country receiving the grain, you know, and Syria might be a good example, the level of influence that Canada or even other countries would have over its willingness to accept grain from stolen grain would be very limited. But I think you've highlighted a very important point in that Russia is using grain to divide the example that Minister gave of the Senegalese president in Russia shows that
Malheureusement, Monsieur,
are vulnerable.
Désolé.
I'm sorry, Mr. McDougall, but Mr. Perron's time is up. Mr. McGregor, 6 minutes.
Very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. McDougall, what we have heard not only from Ms. Klemenko, Member of Parliament, but also just now from the Minister of Agriculture is that, you know, first and foremost, of course, Ukraine needs the weapons of war to help end this conflict. And then thereafter, the immediate needs were for temporary grain storage because of their facilities being maxed out as they are. I guess what I wanted to know from you, from Canada's perspective, I mean, I can only imagine the logistical challenges. On one hand, we are faced with the logistical challenges of trying to ease the way for Ukrainian grain to leave the country, but we're also trying to find ways to get much needed, not only military hardware, but important agricultural hardware into the country. Can you maybe just, from Canada's perspective, how are we as a country dealing with those, with what I must imagine must be a little bit of a logistical nightmare?
So perhaps I'll ask Tara. I mean, I'm not familiar with agricultural inputs to Ukraine, so I'll ask Tara if she has any additional comments.
Well, thanks. And perhaps if I've understood your question correctly, it's the combination of agriculture, but also some of the military and how are we actually getting items in given the logistical challenges. So on the one side, there is a lot of coordination with our NATO allies in terms of specifically the military equipment and how it's coming in. You will have seen in the news that there's a lot of targeting that we're seeing as well. Russia's actually targeting rail lines, and that is specific to to try and undermine any delivery of military assistance, as well as any provisions of additional equipment, be it agriculture or the like. So in terms of detailing that across the G7 and NATO allies, we're aiming or asking countries not to disclose when deliveries are taking place, so that we can actually increase the likelihood of it arriving where it needs to arrive in Ukraine. But it is quite a logistical challenge and requires a level of coordination not only with the Ukrainian and Ukrainian forces, but with allies.
Thank you. This morning, when we were very lucky as a group of parliamentarians to be able to speak with the Deputy Director General of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, she was mentioning that the FAO can play an important role in helping Ukraine maintain the quality of its exports, so that important phytosanitary review and so on. And I know our very own CFIA has a pretty strong international recognition of our standards. Could you maybe just fill in the blanks a little bit more about, you know, how Canada is aiding the FAO in helping Ukraine not only maintain the quantity but the quality of its exports?
Hi there. Thank you for that. I can start with that one if you don't mind, Peter. So when we are, as I spoke, we're looking at various options to respond to the Ukrainian requests, and that includes lab equipment and grain storage, and in and amongst and complementary to the various other activities we do to support local farmers. And FAO is one of the donors, one of the organizations that we work very closely with and would be wanting to continue to work with because of exactly what you've cited, that they know how to work in this area. They're familiar with the requirements. They understand the lab parameters that would be required, and so that would be who we would continue. One of the entities that we would be continuing to work with.
Maybe Mr. McDougall, for my final question, in an exchange with one of my colleagues, I think it was Mr. Turnbull, you know, he was mentioning the cascading effects of this conflict in food insecure regions, especially around Africa. And certainly one of the greatest things that Canada can do for the region is, you know, passing our know-how. And you made mention of climate-smart agriculture. I think, you know, building that kind of resiliency in countries is going to help them withstand future shocks. And especially we know climate change is going to be affecting that part of the world much more severely than even we are used to here in Canada, being a northern latitude. Could you maybe just expand a little bit more on that term of climate smart agriculture and the specific ways Canada is helping countries develop that?
Sure, thanks very much. It's a significant part of our portfolio of investments, especially in Africa, but also in other parts of the world. And so we focus on, you know, intensification of agriculture through better fertilizer management, improved soil health and fertility, and then the diversification of production. And I won't go into. I'll just detail a couple of investments we've made very recently. In fact, since the start of the war in Ukraine, we have provided $100 million to the African Development Bank. That will support the growth of small and medium-sized agriculture businesses in Africa with a focus on climate-smart agriculture, and also provided another $25 million to the International Fund for Agricultural Development, which works a lot with smallholder farmers and in rural communities, and with a real focus there on climate-smart agriculture. And that's really the trajectory of a lot of our investments in the future will be towards climate-smart agricultural practices.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Mr. McDougall. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Mr. Epp, 5 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials for extending your day with us. I missed the FAO briefing this morning because I was in Winnipeg last night attending the retirement of Jim Cornelius for 24 years with the Canadian Food Grains Bank. And so I have the opportunity now to have sat on both sides of that partnership with the Government of Canada and the Food Grains Bank. I'm quite familiar actually with that funding partnership all the way back to 1983. Also with our government's relationship with the Food Grains Bank and other organizations as well. Can you just put some numbers into context? You know, it was mentioned earlier that we're the third largest contributor to the Food Assistance Convention after the U.S. and EU. You've mentioned $100 million of base funding, if I understood correctly, 140 more that's gone toward Ukraine. Out of a total of 600, or is that 600 the kind of the base amount for our humanitarian assistance response, and now we're growing that?
Mr. McDougall, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. I apologize. Our starting point in most years before we access, as I said, either the government provides additional money or we access something called the crisis pool, starts with about $609 or $610 million. And to date, we've moved about $514 million of that. 245 has gone to the Ukraine response. And while the vast majority of that is in Ukraine, including $93 million in direct food assistance. It also goes to support neighboring countries, particularly Moldova, which is not an EU member state. And we do work extensively with local organizations. This was raised earlier, and I want to make the point that we provide support to something called a country-based pool fund, which works directly with over now I think 110 or more Ukrainian institutions, civil society organizations, to deliver humanitarian assistance.
Thank you. I know there was an initial government matching program to leverage funds from the public, donations to the Red Cross. Are there any plans to expand that to, again, leverage public's interest here?
Thank you. Yeah, that was an enormously successful matching fund. I think by far the most successful matching fund we've ever done. And we put up $30 million, and the Red Cross response more than matched that. I think it ended up at $150 million. At this point, there are no plans to launch an additional fund.
Thank you. Obviously the crisis has brought two drivers here. It's the availability of food in parts of the world where Ukraine and Russia supplied, and also the price effect. I don't want to compare them, but can you talk about the intensity? I guess my own fears are, and I've heard other places, that once a population's caloric daily intake drops below 1,800 calories per person on average, you have instability, which leads to civil instability and all the other things. You've touched on that. Is that the greater threat here, even than the lack of food to certain populations?
Thank you. I think that's an excellent question. I mean, we have seen, there's a classification system that goes from 1 to 5, and 5 is famine-like conditions, and so we've seen that go from 44 million people. Sorry, classifications 4 and 5. So extreme hunger bordering on famine. We've seen that go from 44 to 49 million just within the last many months. In large part because of the exacerbation of the food security crisis. I think it's a real risk. There's no question about it. Whether it would result in things like mass migration, I think is hard to say, but I think it most likely results in people rising up and protesting against their governments and potential internal civil conflicts, which we're seeing some of now.
Thank you. More specifically, back to Ukraine, and the minister referenced this, the issue of Russia appropriating grain and then selling it. Is there a potential government response from ourselves? And we were using sanctions in other situations where it can be proven. I know we've heard about Syria, and we have little effect there, but there have been allegations of Turkey, which is also a NATO member. Are we looking at any options there, or even as a deterrent, putting out a policy and things like that to begin to address that phenomenon?
I've not heard about the mention of Turkey, but I know that we do, and Tara can perhaps fill out more here than I can, but I do know that we have sanctions, for example, against Russian ships, so that certainly acts as at least a partial deterrent, but not a total one.
Thank you. I think that's my time.
Oh. Yeah, just quickly, Ms. Denham, if you have 15, 20 seconds.
Sorry, so just in addition to that, we also are doing a broad-based diplomatic engagement where we do outreach to countries. As Peter said, we don't always have the same influence in certain countries, but we are engaging with multiple countries to make sure they're aware of the issue, understand the realities, and align or try and advocate for not purchasing the grains.
Thank you very much to both of you. Ms. Valdez, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses who are here today to share your testimony on this important matter. As someone who was born in Africa, I do want to thank you for all your work that you're doing to help back home, as well as the Ukrainians. So my question is for Mr. McDougall. So we've heard from the minister today that farmers are facing several challenges, including being forced to live under Russian law and convert to Russian-registered businesses. Can you share what kind of actions, if any, are being taken to help combat these challenges?
I think that the global community has brought about the full suite to bring to bear in terms of responding to Russian aggression. military assistance, financial support, sanctions, really the full array of response. I think, it would be, those particular examples would be very challenging, as repugnant as they are to respond to. So that would be my general response, and I'll see if Tara has anything more specific.
Yeah, I think I would just add, you will have also seen that we have returned to Kyiv to engage in high-level diplomatic interactions with Ukraine. And so on that side, we do have our head of mission in Kyiv and engaging with the government of Ukraine. So as Peter said, in specific scenarios and in occupied territories, it's very difficult, but we're doing everything we can to engage with the Ukrainians to understand the situation and to understand where assistance and coordination and alignment can be with Canada.
Thank you. Just as a business owner myself, that assistance is greatly going to help them on the ground. So you mentioned the significant increase in food security. So what has been the global response to that increase as a result of the Ukraine invasion?
So I think you've seen a lot of countries step up. I've described the Canadian response. Certainly, the United States has significantly increased its investments. I think $11 billion is the number over 5 years in food system support, food security, nutrition support around the world. The UK has made new investments, $10 million. The Netherlands. Italy as well. Germany has, in addition to contributing almost €1 billion to support global food supply, has also, through the G7 that it's hosting, really galvanized action, creating a global alliance for food security, which our ministers are engaged with. The French are leading something called a Farm and Agriculture Resilience Mission, which is trying to provide kind of coherence and coordination on policy and investment on food support. And then you have the full range of UN actors. So some of the ones we've mentioned, World Food Program, the FAO, International Fund for Agricultural Development, and many other UN institutions. And then the bank system, the system of international financial institutions. You will know that Canada has been active particularly in the Ukrainian context, in providing additional support to Ukraine, but also our investments in the World Bank and in regional development banks. We've seen those banks step up, particularly the African Development Bank, to respond to the food crisis by lending into countries in both lending and granting money into countries in very dire situations.
Thank you. I appreciate you adding that color. Now, with the sanctions imposed into Russia, what does it mean for our exports? So whether that's oil, rubber, wheat, and any other agriculture products?
Sorry, what does it mean? Can you clarify for Canadian exports? What?
That's correct. So any of our, how does it affect us?
I'm just not understanding. If you can try one more time with that question.
So,
apologies.
Because here in Canada, we export multiple things. So with the sanctions we have imposed in Russia, has there been any impact there?
Okay. I'll take a quick crack at that, but I also think that's also a question that can be addressed to agriculture officials. If I think about the sanctions on Belarusian potash, Canada, of course, is a major producer, and from what I understand, that Canada has increased production of potash, and I think is or will open a new potash mine in response. So I think where possible, you will see Canadian industry doing everything it can to respond to gaps in the marketplace.
We'll have to leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. McDougall. Thank you, Ms. Valdez. Maintenant, Monsieur Perron, 2 minutes, 30 seconds.
Mr. Perron, 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been talking a lot about world food security. What concerns me and the Ukrainian situation is extremely concerning, but the food crisis that looks as if it will be starting in August is very concerning. Is there a strategy in place to help countries, African countries, for example, that might find themselves facing a famine. Could you please tell us something about that?
Okay, thank you for that. I would say the food crisis is happening now, and it could get much worse as time goes on, particularly if we do not see action on both Ukrainian exports, but also on Russian exports, which they're restricting. What's the strategy in the place there for Canada, and I think for many other donors? The strategy continues to be to provide support and investment to respond to humanitarian needs. So Canada will continue to do that. I know that the G7, I expect to be a moment where countries announce new commitments and new investments, both to respond to the situation in Ukraine, but also the global food security crisis that is a consequence. And so I think you will see new investments there. Certainly the international community, led by the UN, is galvanizing countries and international financial institutions to come together with a collective plan to respond. But I think, in a couple of weeks, you'll see significant action on that at the G7.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Will that assistance include permanent investment to help these regions achieve food independence rather than just spot payments or one-time assistance? Because that's a very important aspect of the assistance, to help with something permanent like irrigation structures.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with you, and that's why our response, both before the Ukraine crisis and since, has been to balance our investments. So we, as I've described, we have made significant investments in direct humanitarian assistance, so meeting immediate needs, but we also continue to make systemic investments, whether it's in climate-smart agriculture, developing food systems, changing the policy and regulatory environment of countries to reduce barriers in the marketplace. That's the balance. That's the balance that Canada follows. That is also the balance that most leading donors in the agricultural space also follow.
Thank you, Mr. McDougall. Thank you, Mr. Perron. Now, Mr. McGregor has ceded his 2.5 minutes. As your chair, I haven't had the opportunity to ask a few questions, and if you'll permit me 2 or 3 minutes, I will go. Thank you to Mr. McDougall and Ms. Denham. We heard from the minister, and we also heard from Madame Klemenko about the explicit targeting of the plant breeding research station in Kharkiv. We heard from FAO officials this morning that there is a work underway to try to, I'll say, salvage those different 160,000 different varieties and plant breeding types. I can only assume that this is extremely important to rebuild that stock. We know how important the research has been in Canada to develop weather-resistant varieties and even canola and different types of that nature. Is this something you're aware of, and is there something that Canada can do to be a part of rebuilding that system? Is that something that GAC is aware of and looking at?
Did you want me to respond, Peter, to that one? Again, on that one, actually, I'm very interested to hear about it. It has not been a part of this specific request that Ukraine has made to Canada, and so those requests have come to the Minister of Agriculture, of course, and then through Global Affairs. So that specific situation has not been brought to our attention at this point.
And just as it relates to those requests, we heard from the minister, tree saplings, photosanitary measures, different types of equipment that can help on that end. What's the status on that? And how long ago did that come in as a request?
Sorry, so for the situation that you just described, in that case, we haven't received that request. The request that we've received via the Minister of Agriculture for some of the lab equipment, I think that letter was received approximately 2 weeks ago. Again, that would have been received directly by the Minister of Agriculture, but we've been working with Agriculture ever since to NCFIA to identify what we can do and what that would look like and how we can respond.
Thank you very much. Just two other quick questions. Mr. McDougall, you mentioned many of the different initiatives that are underway by G7 partners and other countries around the world. Who is helping to try to coordinate as it relates to global food security? I know the United Nations FAO would have some ability to convene individuals in that side, but is there some special envoy? Is there someone that's doing to try to bring all the different initiatives together to help coordinate, rationalize? And if there isn't, is that something Canada, with our deep expertise in agriculture, could offer someone to serve as a special envoy to try to help coordinate the multiple efforts at play?
Thanks for that. So there is, I would say, there's a number of mechanisms and tools that bring countries together to discuss that. One is a legacy from the 2008-9 crisis, which was started by the G20, called the GAFSP, which is a global assistance facility. So that has been active. Both the Americans, so Secretary of State Blinken convened countries. Minister Joly attended in the UN a couple of weeks ago. The UN is playing a coordinating role, and then a number of countries have named special envoys. I would say that the overall coordination is still emerging, but the G7 is really playing a critical role right now to bring donors together, both G7 and beyond.
Final question. It was mentioned, of course, the prospect of trying to broker some type of trade corridor out of Odessa, out of the Black Sea. And Minister Solsky certainly spoke to the fact that the United Nations is leading that effort. It seemed to be a little bit outside the scope of having Ukraine directly involved. What is Canada's role in part of those conversations? Is that through Ambassador Ray and the delegation that we would have at the UN, or is this something that we are explicitly involved in trying to help find a pathway to get grain to market?
Thank you for that. It's a very, as you can imagine, a very delicate negotiation that the UN and the Turks, and then at some point Russia and Ukraine will need to engage if they haven't already on that. And so we're watching it very closely, mostly through the G7 working group that I sit on, but also certainly our ambassador in Ukraine will be watching it very closely, as will Ambassador Ray. In fact, we had discussions about it when Minister Joly was in New York a few weeks ago. So that's one that it really does offer the greatest promise in terms of the volumes, but it is politically the most challenging, and there are also obviously some very obvious safety risks as well.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for indulging me for a few questions. Thank you, Mr. McDougall and Ms. Denham, for your participation. We know we ran a little bit long, but your testimony is very helpful to the work that we're doing. And thank you, because the work that you're doing is extremely important and ties into everything that we've been discussing over the last 2 hours. So with that, colleagues, we'll let everyone enjoy their evening, and we will see you back on Monday.
Thank you very much.